So, Alison, I think we're probably in a good place to make a start if you are. So, welcome to this session, everybody. My name's Ben Dales, Head of Digital at IABM, and I'd like to welcome Alison Pavitt from Pebble. So, Alison, welcome to this session. Thank you very much for joining us. So, Alison, can you give us a bit of background about yourself to start?
Sure, yeah. So as you said, I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at Pebble here. I've joined the company about 11 years ago as marketing manager and took on this role earlier on this year to actually start linking the marketing and the sales functions together better. So that's been a great challenge and it's going really well. I started my career in the business actually with Aston, the character generator people. So having left university as a languages graduate, went to British Steel for a brief 18-month period there, decided it wasn't for me, and joined broadcast with Aston and spent quite a long time with them. And of course, once you're in, you don't leave, do you? So it's been a great ride, really. So yes, yeah, loving the challenge at the moment.
Excellent. And so why don't we set a bit of context around what we're talking about today, where we're talking about selling solutions rather than necessarily the tech. So can you give us a bit of context around how did Pebble historically operate as a business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the interesting thing is when I first joined the company and started doing, press releases and trying to find case studies and make statements about some of the systems that we were implementing, the response always came back, well, that's not a typical system, well, that's not a typical system. And of course, you get told that a few times and you think, hang on a minute, there is no such thing as a typical system. So I think for quite a long time, there was a sort of a push to consider the company as a product company. We were selling products, and of course we've always sold solutions. We just never really admitted it to ourselves. We've never sold the same thing twice. I mean, it probably never will, because every customer has a different workflow, a different set of different channel count, a different set of challenges that they're trying to solve. And so really that's our strength really is in our ability to be able to do that for them. So yeah, it's not so much that we've changed what we do because we've always been a solutions company, but we've definitely acknowledged that, and we are owning it much more, I suppose, than we have done in the past.
Mm-hmm. And so if anybody watching does have any questions or anything, then please do use the question section within the Interact tab. And if we have time, we'll try and get to them towards the end of the session with Alison. Yeah. So, Alison, I know you alluded to it there in your introduction, but what were the other drivers to reposition yourself as a solutions company?
Yeah, we went through, but we've had quite an interesting time recently, Pebble, changes of ownership, changes of leadership. And one of the things that was that came out of the recent change of leadership with Peter Mayhead as CEO is that we re-examined our sort of vision, mission and values. And, having established what the mission of the company was, I wanted to take on the challenge of actually establishing what the brand values were. And that really tells a lot about ourselves. So we wanted to really understand what the company's true north was so that we knew what we stood for and that those values would then inform all our decision making. And so it was probably one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career is to run a series of workshops with everybody in the company. So that the method that we chose was to break everybody up into small groups, some remote, some in person, and go through a sort of hour-long workshop with each of them to understand what they thought the company stood for. And in order to do that, we presented them with a massive long list of things, which might have included things like spirituality or harmony or reliability, all sorts of things. And over the course of the hour workshop, each of those groups would identify what they thought the values were. They'd then agree as a group what they were. And myself and Hannah, our HR lead, worked together to consolidate all those findings together. And what came out of that was really clear that we're all about flexibility. We're all about solving customers' problems. We'll go the extra mile. We love to sort of get really stuck in and find out exactly what they want to do. And it became more and more apparent to us that we really are not and never have been a product company. And the values that came out were, be the expert, find a solution, success through partnership, do the right thing, which is important when you're trying to put a solution together for somebody, and every pebble matters. And by every pebble, we would say not just our, the team who work here, but also the people who use our equipment. And so having then established by a sort of democratic process, if you like, what the values were, we weren't imposing them on the team. We were basically uncovering what those values were through these workshops. It became apparent that, yes, we are a solutions company, and that's really how we need to conduct ourselves. And that then led on to us talking much more about our people and our process and not just about our products. So it's been a sort of much more holistic view that we're taking now on what we do, rather than just talking about the technology. It's very tempting in this industry, and I think a lot of companies fall into this trap of leading on the technology, and really what we should be leading on is the problem. What's the problem? And the problem needs a solution, and hence we're a solution company. And I think, in truth, I think most companies in this industry are. Mm-hmm. And it's just actually acknowledging that and attaching a value to the team that provide those solutions, that deliver the projects, and that keep supporting the projects throughout the solutions throughout their lifetime.
And I can imagine there was some really interesting feedback with bringing in the whole team as well to do those sort of work groups and things. I think a lot of people maybe don't think to include everybody in those type of.
It was very important to us that we weren't, because having gone through such a lot of change, it's easy to kind of lose, or to lose a grip on what the company culture is. And I always think that one of marketing's biggest role is internal marketing as well as external marketing. So it was really important to actually understand what was making people tick, how they felt about the organization, what they felt was important. And what was so interesting was that there was so much commonality. You know, it wasn't hard. We were looking for between 3 and 5, and each group at the end of their workshop would deliver 5 values, and they almost always tallied in some way. They might use different words across all the different groups, but so what we really were doing was trying to sort of put an ear to the ground, understand what the company culture was, how everybody was feeling, and reflect that back to them, rather than to dictate or impose. And in fact, then to actually embed them, we had a workshop, a company-wide workshop, where we sort of announced really how we decided to word those values back to the team. And then they all went off into groups and said, okay, if this is our value, what will you see us do? And what will you hear us say? So people could then actually understand really what that meant to them. The other thing we do, so that was a really important step in embedding those values. But the other thing that we do is every week, our CEO, we're all encouraged to sort of report in on how the team's living those values. And so every week there's an email that comes out to the whole company, which just gives a shout out to various people who've, you know, demonstrated every Pebble matters by having somebody's back during a particularly difficult situation, or, you know, success story part, you know. And so basically it's constantly being reinforced. So yeah, it's been a really useful exercise, and it does absolutely keep that culture thread going, you know, week on week, and keep embedding them in the company. The other strength actually of having gone through that exercise is that it's really useful for onboarding and recruitment, because it's very easy for somebody who's joining the company to understand what kind of a company we might be, what it might be like to work for us. These are our values. This is what we hang our hat on, and therefore, you know, this gives you an insight into the culture and to how we're likely to behave.
Because you've actually created a booklet, I think I saw on an interview with colleagues recently for IBM. There you go, that's the one.
It's never far from my side. So this is something that we do every year. We sort of renew it. So obviously this year's got the lovely new branding on it. It talks about the values, reinforces the values, goes through what you'll see us do and what you'll hear us say, and then also sort of lays out the annual goals, both across the company and for all the different departments, and also talks about the customer journey. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and it kind of expands a bit every year. There's a bit more that we add in, perhaps a bit about, you know, coaching your peers, or you know, what else have we got in there? Oh yeah, when things like your Pebble year, what you can expect to see happen, you know. So it's an internal resource, but gets used all the time. So yeah, it's a really handy thing.
Excellent. And so, Alison, you've done these workshops, you've worked in a collaborative way to establish your brand values. How did you then go about repositioning yourselves?
Yeah, well, as I said, it was more a case of acknowledging who we really were anyway, and that's been the good thing about the whole process. Really, is not trying to implement, you know, a massive amount, you know, not to trying to change direction, but just to really acknowledge the truth of who we are anyway. We rebranded nearly a year ago, so it's October last year we rebranded, so that was very helpful. That gave us an opportunity to sort of establish a different look. And I could get all nerdy about how the circle in the brand, you know, means that all these different pebbles form a solution, and the continuity of the, but I'll leave that there. But one of the main things we did in the rebrand was to actually decide, it was a difficult decision, but was just decide to stop referring to the products that we've been selling all these years by the names that were marina and dolphin, all these lovely sort of marine mammals that we'd accumulated along the way, orca and stingray, because although our existing customer base know who they are, and of course internally, you know, they're shorthand to whatever the solution is, for new customers, they were sort of getting in the way, and they didn't really, you know, it was quite hard to sort of try and get past that name to then understand what we did. So if we say, no, it's Pebble Automation or it's Pebble Integrated Channel, then it's clearer that what you're doing is putting together the relevant Pebble applications to provide a Pebble solution. It kind of serves that whole message much more clearly, I think, than having to navigate past these old product names. Having said that, you know, people are still, you know, internally it's a bit of a battle because people kind of still love the name. So yeah, it's difficult trying to get people to sort of to move away from that, but we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. And you know, there's the data sheets are now all being redone. The UIs look slightly different, you know, but it's definitely it's definitely a journey that we're still on. I hate to use that word, but it is. But yes, we've got to just keep embedding it. And I think this is definitely one of the ways in which we're serving that message that, you know, by doing away with these product names that potentially were confusing to new people, it's a much more clear proposition, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, that talking about, you know, the mindsets and things of how people have got so used to what a product is called, and almost that fear of changing it, because is that going to alienate previous customers or current customers or anything? So that must have been quite a challenge.
I mean, I was probably the one who felt the greatest fear, because you get quite emotionally attached to, you know, this visual branding and all the, you know, you basically spend your life plugging these things, and then to sort of suddenly leave that name behind. I needed a lot of persuading. I mean, I knew it was the right thing to do, but I really needed pushing to do it. So yeah, no, it has been quite tricky, but it's definitely the right thing to do. And you know, just to circle back to the values, do the right thing. And that, you know, you had to sort of stand back and say, hang on a minute, this is the right thing to do. Just get on with it, you know. So you have to live them, really, don't you, as well as printing them up in nice booklets.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to say, and I'm not saying this just because you're here, Alison, but I do think it's probably the strongest brand update and change that I've seen for a long time. I know when it came out, we were all very, you know, very impressed with how it all looked. And you can tell, having spoken to you and just hearing what the process was, it now makes sense why it was so successful.
Yeah, I have to say that well, that's great to hear. Thanks very much, Ben. Really good partner, graphic design partner. So we took pitches from 3 companies, and the company that we worked with were not the most expensive by any means, but I loved their process. And that was very interesting, being sold to by a company that was selling as a solution rather than some graphics. They were selling as a process. And we learned from that. I mean, we kept discussing. We also, at a similar time, implemented a new project management solution. And again, they sold as a solution. We're like, oh, hang on, let's just observe what's going on here. You know, they ran workshops with us and uncovered who our audience is, who buys our equipment, who our audiences are, how do we feel about it, you know, and actually it was a fascinating process. And I think the result, you know, speaks for itself, like you say, and it's great to hear that.
So let's focus back on the challenges then, Alison. What were some of the other challenges that you faced throughout this whole process?
I think understanding how far-reaching the rebrand has to be. You know, you think you've thought of everything, and you think that you're living by the values, and you think that you've got everybody on board, and there's always something that, you know, just kind of slips through the net, or something that you didn't quite catch in time. It's a massive thing to do, as you know, and the sort of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning on the day of the rebrand to swap all the branding over on all the social media platforms and stuff. There's so much to it, and it's quite a sort of adrenaline rush when you're doing it. But I think probably the major challenge are probably the ones that I've already covered. I think as far as the customers are concerned, there might have been a bit of kind of love for the old logo that people feel a bit wistful about losing. But in terms of the solutions rather than the product, all of our customers know that we've always sold them a solution. You know, everybody understands, anybody who's dealt with understands how much passion and time and effort and expertise we put into delivering the systems that we sell. So to them, it was no surprise. It was almost more of a surprise to us, you know, to actually say, hang on a minute, this is what's going on here. This is what we sell. And it's just, the important thing to us is, I mean, one of the things it does allow us to do is to highlight the expertise of the team, which was something that was sort of known, but not necessarily kind of sold, if you like. It didn't form part of a negotiation or of the sales process. And now that's much more upfront. As I said, about, you know, my sort of 3 words are the people, the process, and the technology. And the technology's last, but not, obviously it's not as front and center a lot of the time, but the people really matter and the process really matters. And I think it's given us permission to actually highlight all of those areas in the sales and the consultation process, and to attach a value to those. And that really is important, because when we are excuse me, implementing quite complex solutions, the customer needs to understand that when there's a change that goes through, the expertise of the people at the time of the people has a value in implementing that change. That's as much part of the solution as the tweak that we're making to the system. And so that's been really helpful, actually, to have that to hang your hat on, really, as you negotiate through these really quite complex and lengthy implementations that we get involved in.
Okay, and so, Alison, we're talking here about promoting a solution rather than necessarily the technology. And you've mentioned about changing the name of the products, but have you found that the way you market those products has changed slightly? They're not quite so maybe tech and data sheet heavy. Is it a different, when you're promoting a solution rather than technology, do you have to have a different approach with the wording you use?
I remember when we were doing sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just thinking about when we sort of relaunched the website, some of the wording that we put in on the website right at the top for each application, let's call them now, rather than product, very much talked about consulting with us to make sure we configure this correctly for you, rather than this is a thing, it does a thing, how many would you like? You know what I mean? It's a completely different, it's the wording you use is different. So you have to, you're coming from a different standpoint. You're saying, we do have the tools and we have the people, and the kind of thing that you could do with these is this, but talk to us, and we'll partner you every step of the way, but talk to us and understand what our expertise is. Actually, we're going to be launching quite a cool new thing on the website over the next few days, which is a bit of fun, visually appealing. Cool. I'll be calling it the Solution Builder. That's right, the Pebble Solution Builder. Quite key. And it's a very simple way of getting people to engage on the website, so they can just look at the pebbles, each of which have particular things in them. Might be, compressed IP, it might be redundancy, and they can drop the pebble into a little pool. It populates an email, pops over to the sales team, and it's a conversation starter. I mean, by no means are we expecting customers to design a complete system. It's much more simplistic than that, but it's a fun way of interacting with the customer that's just going to get that conversation started. We have an idea of where they want to go with the problem they want to solve, and it just opens the door for us to contact them. So something like that would never have made sense on the previous website with all the previous branding, which was very heavily marine mammal focused. It's a much more friendly, accessible way of promoting what we do. And as I said, please don't assume that you can actually configure a really complex system just by dropping pebbles into a pool. All we're getting from you is, we're probably in this space, we're looking at cloud. Actually, we've got 20 channels that we want to automate, and it'll just send us an email. It's just a bit of fun. It's underlining the solution message. So yeah, that should be live, I think, probably in the next week or so, which should be quite a bit of fun.
It's also from a marketing perspective, it's a very clever way for you to capture data from people without them realizing they're doing it. They're effectively filling in. We're on a marketing event here. They're effectively
not trying to do anything underhand here, but yes,
of course not. But they're effectively filling in a form, but in a fun way that they don't feel like they're having to do that. So I think it's a very clever way to capture data.
And of course it makes kind of a fun little noise as it plops into the pool. So it's been. I mean, that was one of the more bizarre things I've had to do, is choose the plop noise for the for the pool as you drop the pebbles into it. But as I said, it is absolutely very high level, really fun, engaging, and hopefully it'll just start a few conversations. That's really the point. Yeah.
Excellent. And so, Alison, what is the future for Pebble as a solutions company?
Well, one of the things that we sort of looking at doing is we went to one of the other exercises that I was involved with probably in the last 18 months was mapping out the customer journey internally. So this is we've got a really big internal document which shows visually how the customer engages with us, right from we do a marketing initiative and we get some leads via the website, to the customer signs the invoice with a smile on his face, goes into support, circles around support, and then comes back to us for an upgrade in a while. The steps that are involved there. And there's a job there to be done in terms of looking at all the individual steps with each team and understanding where the 1% might be. How can we make things better? How can we gear that better to match our values, or to be more solutions focused? That's a really good piece of work which is going to be going on internally, and will obviously ultimately benefit the customer. One of the other things that we're doing is don't really know how this is going to tie into solutions. I suppose it's been an internal solution. Now obviously 18 months ago, if it's 18 months ago, we all pivoted to remote working straight away, and we lived under lockdown, worked under lockdown conditions for all that time. And during that process, a questionnaire was sent out to staff, because a lot of people were finding that they were preferring working like this. Not everybody, don't get me wrong, but that productivity seemed to be going up and efficiency seemed to be going up and so on. So we canvassed all the staff to find out whether or not they would like to continue doing this once lockdown was finished. And actually the consensus came back. It wasn't unanimous, but the consensus did come back that yes, that would be a good thing to do. So as of, I think it was June in the UK, when the lockdown restrictions sort of formally came to some kind of an end. I lose track, to be honest. Maybe it was July. We started moving towards a remote-only model. Now, 40% of the workforce was already not in Weybridge, which is where our headquarters were. And so by moving to a remote-only model, we are removing any location bias that might exist, either in meetings where 8 of us are in the room but one's remote, or it also stops us using the office, the physical location, as a sort of crutch for collaboration. We don't need to do that. We can collaborate remotely. It's different. You know, you have to use different tools. You have to be a lot more savvy about how you put agendas together for your meetings and all this kind of thing. But that is something that we're working towards now. And in fact, we're just working to recruit a head of remote, so that we are, I don't think it's going to be a permanent role, but it will be a role which is certainly on contract, which is going to transition us to an intentionally remote company, rather than somebody that's just fallen out at the end of lockdown and still hasn't gone back into the office. So you talk to me here in a meeting room in a hotel in Woking, because we've had a meeting there, because we're not really going back to the office anymore. And I think that's, in terms of finding a solution, or, being a solutions-based company, internally, our solution is to get head of remote in, to make sure that we do this well, that we, employ best practice, that we're good at asynchronous communication and so on, and we don't just spend all our time doing meetings, which is obviously a temptation. And I think that is that's going to be the way forward. Now, one of the really great things about being a remote-only workforce is that we can recruit from anywhere. All of us talent increases exponentially, because we just took on a product owner who's based in Malaga. We've got our CTOs based in Zagreb anyway. We've got people all over the world, basically, and all of a sudden you end up with a huge pool of talent that you can access, rather than trying to accommodate people who can easily get into Weybridge and don't, and I, for one, relish the fact that I don't have to do the commute anymore. So I'm very happy about that. So the solutions work continues. It continues both internally and externally. And I think probably the most obvious thing that all the new collateral keeps rolling out for the new branding and solutions. So that's an ongoing thing. The customer journey thing will have ramifications for customers and internally in terms of our solutions messaging. And the all remote working thing is just, there's a lot of change going on, and it just all feels really positive. And certainly the remote working thing has been an absolute revelation. As I said, it doesn't suit everybody, but it suits a lot of people really very well. And I think it's definitely opened up a lot of new opportunities for us in terms of how we can work, who we can recruit, how we can commission systems, how we can be innovative. It sort of opens a lot of doors for us. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're one of the first people I've heard talk about getting a head of remote in. And I think there'll be a lot of people watching this now that will be saying, when the pandemic first started and we were all working from home, I know marketing departments suffered quite a bit, because we were all so used to, you would just turn around and say, can you look at this on my screen? Or, walking over to someone and say, it's really interesting that, you talk about new collaborative ways of working and everything. Yeah. So I think there's definitely massive opportunities there for
one of the things that we did was so last week I was working with a colleague, our market analyst, on a piece of research, and we were trying to sort of whack through a presentation, sort of knock it into shape, and we just kept a call open for 3 hours. Which is literally the same as sitting next to them in the office. So why not just do that, and then nobody else can interrupt you. It's even better, to be honest. Nobody else can interrupt you because you're on a call already. And it was just brilliant. It felt like sitting next to her. And, I suppose you just have to open your mind. The other thing I would say, actually, just quickly, is that being remote doesn't mean you don't see anybody. It just means you're probably not going to the office to see them. So, we do have a co-working day every month. The marketing team we just kind of go somewhere that's central at the moment, and that's Newbury, because of who's on the team. So we just go off and have a day working together there. So, you know, it doesn't mean never see anybody. It just means let's not all schlep into the office every day. Let's use that time more productively. You know, we might have commitments at home. We might have other things that we need to do. We might want to start work early, whatever. So yeah, it's fun times.
Yeah, I definitely think it's brought a lot more flexibility, hasn't it, to people to be able to do that. So
absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm conscious that we're starting to come to the end of the time here, Alison, and I know that there is another session going on, which IABM's Lisa Collins is hosting a buyer panel. So it'll be interesting to get their views around all of these issues and everything. But Alison, I'd just like to thank you very much for joining us. It's been really interesting here. And as I said, I really liked the rebrand. So it's been really good to hear the background behind it. And I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think to do the elements that you did at the beginning, you know, all of those workshops and getting the values. And I think every company needs to have a value behind it, doesn't it? And every company needs to have staff that believe in those values and want to promote those values, don't they?
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to, you know, understand the process that we went through. There are lots of ways of doing it, but yeah, absolutely happy to discuss that with anybody who's interested, because it worked so well for us.
Excellent. Okay, so well, Alison, thank you again, once again. And anybody wishing to attend the next session, all you need to do is just, if you leave this room and head back to the live sessions tab, and then you'll be able to see the next session starting. And when we get to hour, you'll be able to automatically join it. So once again, Alison, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all of you who have been watching today.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody.